The smell of the Golden Steer Saloon was a suffocating mix of stale whiskey, unwashed bodies, and despair. For Amelia, this was the scent of her father's failure. She sat on a wooden crate in the corner, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on a point in the darkness that only she could see. $300, Henry, a voice growled Mr. Dawson, the loan shark. His voice sounded like gravel grinding against bone. You owe me 300, and you've got nothing left to bet. I have the girl, her father stammered. The shame in his voice was thick, but his desperation was thicker. She's strong. She can cook. She's obedient. Amelia didn't flinch. She had known this day was coming since the drinking started after her mother died. She was 22, but in the darkness of her world, she felt like a child waiting for a monster under the bed. A blind girl? Dawson scoffed. What use do I have for a blind girl, Henry? She's dead weight. She knows her way around a kitchen. Her father pleaded, his voice cracking. Please, just take the debt off the books. Suddenly, the saloon door swung open. The sound wasn't the usual raucous entry of a cowboy looking for a drink. It was a heavy, deliberate thud, followed by the V. Rhythmic clink-drag of heavy boots and a spur. The noise in the saloon died instantly. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. It's him, someone whispered near Amelia. The burned man. Don't look at him, another hissed. It's bad luck. Amelia turned her head slightly, her ears pricking up. She heard heavy. Footsteps approached the poker table. They stopped right in front of her father. She smelled wood smoke, charred leather, and something else, something sharp like ozone. I'll pay the debt, a voice said. It was a voice unlike any Amelia had ever heard. It was deep, ruined, and raspy, as if the throat that produced it had been damaged by smoke. It vibrated in her chest, terrifying and compelling all at once. Mr. Blackwood, Dawson stammered, the arrogance gone from his tone. We were just conducting business. I heard, the stranger said. $300 for the girl. A heavy bag landed on the table with the solid thud of gold coins. Take it, the stranger commanded. And the girl comes with me. Done. Her father cried out, snatching the bag. He didn't even say goodbye. He didn't touch her shoulder or whisper a final apology. He just took the money and ran toward the bar. Amelia felt a large gloved hand grip her upper arm. It wasn't gentle, but it wasn't cruel either. It was firm, impersonal, like someone handling a sack of flour. Stand up, the voice commanded. Amelia stood, her cane tapping the floor nervously. Who are you? I'm the man who just bought you, he replied coldly. Let's go. He pulled her toward the door. The silence in the saloon was deafening as they passed. Amelia could feel the eyes of the patrons boring into them, not at her, but at him. She heard a woman gasp and whisper, Look at his face. Dear God, it's a nightmare. Outside, the night air was cool. He lifted her easily onto the seat of a wagon. Stay put, he ordered. He climbed up beside her, the wagon dipping under his weight. He snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward. They rode in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the creaking of the wheels and the distant howl of a coyote. Amelia wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Why? She asked finally, her voice trembling. Why did you pay so much for me? I can't see, sir. I'm not much use for certain things. I don't need you to see, the man grunted. I need someone to cook and clean, who won't run away screaming every time I walk into the room. And since you can't run very fast, you'll do. It was a harsh answer, but Amelia sensed a strange defensive note in it. My name is Amelia, she said, softly. I didn't ask. What should I call you? There was a long pause. They call me the Beast of Blackwood, he said, his voice dripping with self-loathing. Or the monster. Take your pick. I prefer names, Amelia said stubbornly. He sighed, a rasping sound. Silas Blackwood. The wagon began to climb. The air grew thinner and smelled of pine and charred wood. After another hour, they stopped. Get down, Silas ordered. He didn't help her this time. Amelia climbed down carefully, her cane finding purchase on gravel. She heard the sound of a heavy door opening. Inside. She stepped over the threshold into a house that smelled of old ashes. And neglect. It was cold. There's a room to the left. That's yours, Silas said. Kitchen is straight ahead. Don't go upstairs. Ever. Amelia nodded. She turned toward where his voice was coming from. Mr. Blackwood? What? She reached out a hand, instinctively trying to orient herself toward him. Thank you for getting me out of that saloon. Silas didn't answer. Amelia heard him step back quickly, his boots scraping the floor as if he were afraid of her touch. Don't thank me yet, he growled. You haven't seen? You haven't lived here yet. Go to sleep. A door slammed shut, locking her in with the monster. But as Amelia stood in the dark hallway, she realized something strange. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. Her father was gone. The lone shark was gone. And the man with the ruined voice. He hadn't hurt her. He had just sounded lonely. Morning didn't come with light for Amelia. It came with a change in temperature. The air in the room shifted from the sharp chill of night to the slightly warmer, stale dryness of a high-altitude day. She sat up in the strange bed, the scratchy wool blanket falling away. For a moment, panic flared. Where was she? Then the memory of the saloon, a heavy bag of gold, and the rasping voice of Silas Blackwood came rushing back. She was in the beast's lair. She dressed quickly in her one good dress, feeling for the wall to guide her to the door. She opened it cautiously. The house was silent. Mr. Blackwood? She called out softly. No answer. Amelia tapped her cane lightly against the floorboards, counting her steps. 1, 2, 3, doorway. She found the kitchen by the smell lingering wood smoke and cold coffee. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had lived in darkness for 10 years. She trailed her fingers along the counters, mapping the space. A cast-iron stove, cold. A table, rough-hewn wood, sticky in spots. A pantry door, creaky. It was a mess. She could feel the grit of ash on every surface. It seemed Silas Blackwood lived in the aftermath of the fire that had ruined him, letting the soot settle into the very pores of his home. Well, Amelia whispered to herself, rolling up her sleeves. I may be blind, but I'm not useless. She found the wood box and kindling by feel. Within 20 minutes, she had a fire roaring in the stove. She located a sack of flour, a tin of lard, and a jar of questionable coffee beans. By the time the front door opened an hour later, the kitchen smelled of fresh biscuits and brewing coffee. Silas stopped in the doorway. He had been out checking the perimeter of his property, a habit born of paranoia. He expected to find the girl cowering in her room or weeping in a corner. Instead, he found her standing by the stove, flipping bacon in a skillet. The kitchen was warm. The table was wiped clean. What are you doing? He barked, the harshness of his voice covering his shocked Amelia didn't jump. She turned toward his voice, a spatula in her hand. Breakfast, Mr. Blackwood. I assumed you ate. I eat cold beans, he muttered, walking into the room. He sounded heavy, his boots dragging. Slightly. You shouldn't be messing with the stove. You'll burn yourself. I've been cooking since I was 12, Amelia said calmly. I know where the heat is. Sit down. The coffee is fresh. Silas hesitated. He looked at the table, where she had set 2 plates. 2. No one had eaten at a table with him in 5 years. "I don't eat with people," he said, moving to take his plate to the corner. "Why?" Amelia asked. She was plating the biscuits, her movements sure and efficient. "Do you chew with your mouth open?" Silas blinked. "No." "Do you throw food?" "No." "Then you can sit at the table," she said firmly. "My father may have sold me to you, Mr. Blackwood, but I am not a dog, and neither are you. We will eat like civilized people." Silas stared at her. She was small, pale, and looked like a stiff breeze. Could knock her over. Her eyes were a cloudy, pale blue, staring fixedly at his chest. She couldn't see the hideous scar that pulled his left eye down. She couldn't see the patch of melted skin on his neck. She was the only person in the world who didn't flinch when, looking at him, slowly, warily, Silas pulled out a chair and sat. They ate in silence. The biscuits were fluffy, the bacon crisp. It was the best meal Silas had eaten in a decade. "The house is dirty," Amelia said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "I can feel the dust on everything. It feels like soot." Silas stiffened. "It is soot. From the fireplace?" "From the fire," he said shortly. "The one that took my face." "Oh." Amelia paused, her fork hovering. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Everyone knows," Silas scoffed bitterly. "The Great Fire of '85 took the whole south wing of the ranch. Took my parents. Took my ... face." He waited for the pity or the horror. "It must have been very hot," Amelia said simply. Then she took a bite of biscuit. "If you fetch me water from the well, I can scrub the floors today." Silas stared at her. "You want to scrub the floors?" "I can't live in a dirty house, Mr. Blackwood." "I might trip." A strange sound escaped Silas's throat. It was rusty and dry, like a hinge that hadn't been oiled. It was a chuckle. "You're a strange woman, Amelia," he said. "And you're a terrible conversationalist," she retorted, a small smile playing on her lips. For the next few weeks, a routine formed. Silas would work the ranch. He raised sheep now, animals that didn't judge him, and Amelia would wage war on the grime inside the house. She learned the layout of the ranch by sound and touch. She knew Silas was coming by the heavy tread of his left boot. She knew he was agitated when she smelled the acrid smoke of his cheap cigars. One evening, Silas came in to find Amelia sitting by the fire, her hands resting idly in her lap. She looked bored. "There's nothing to clean," she sighed. "I've memorized every crack in the floorboards." Silas looked at her. He looked at the shelf of dusty books he hadn't touched in years. He walked over and pulled one down. It was David Copperfield. "Do you ... do you like stories?" he asked awkwardly. Amelia lit up. "I used to read all the time. Before my sight went. I could ... Silas cleared his throat. "I could read, if you want." Amelia turned her face toward him, her expression soft and eager. "I would like that very much." Silas sat in his armchair. He opened the book, the spine cracking. He began to read. His voice was rough, rasping over the words, but he read with a surprising cadence. He gave the characters voices. He paused for dramatic effect. Amelia listened, entranced. And Silas, looking at her peaceful face in the firelight, realized that, for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't thinking about the fire. He wasn't thinking about his scars. He was just a voice in the dark, and she was the only one listening. Summer arrived in the high country with a vengeance, turning the mountain air thick with the scent of pine resin and blooming sage. The reading sessions had become a nightly ritual, a sacred space carved out of the silence of their lives. Silas had finished David Copperfield, and moved on to Treasure Island, his rough voice oddly suited to the tales of pirates and high seas. But as the days grew longer, Amelia grew restless. The house, once a vast unknown to explore, had become small. She knew every creak of the floorboards, every chip in the teacups. She craved the sun on her face. "I want to go out," she announced one afternoon, standing by the open kitchen door. Leaning on her cane, Silas, who was oiling a harness at the table, stopped. "Out? Out where?" "It's rough terrain, Amelia. Rocks, roots, you'll fall. I have a cane, and I have you," she said simply. "Unless you plan to keep me a prisoner in this tower forever, Mr. Blackwood?" Silas grunted. He hated it when she teased him. It made him feel things he had no business feeling. But he stood up, the heavy scraping of his boots announcing his decision. "Fine. But if you twist an ankle, don't expect me to carry you back." "I wouldn't dream of it," she smiled. He approached her, and for the first time, instead of grabbing her elbow like a sack of grain, he offered his arm. "Take it," he muttered. Amelia slid her hand into the crook of his arm. His bicep was hard as iron under the flannel shirt, but she felt a slight tremor as her fingers curled around the muscle. He was tense, always tense. They walked out onto the porch and down the steps. Silas moved slowly, shortening his long stride to match hers. He narrated the path in his gruff, clipped way. "Step down here. Root on the left. Gravel." They walked until they reached the edge of the creek that cut through the property. The sound of rushing water filled the air, cool and refreshing. "It's beautiful here," Amelia said, tilting her head back to catch the sun. "I can smell the water. And wild mint?" "Yeah, grows along the bank," Silas said. He looked at her. The sunlight caught the stray hairs escaping her bun, turning them to gold. She looked peaceful, entirely at odds with the ruin of a man standing beside her. "Silas," she asked softly, "why don't you ever go into town?" Silas stiffened. "I have everything I need here." "That's a lie," she said gently. "You send the ranch hand for supplies. You hide when the mail rider comes. You're hiding. Have you forgotten who you're talking to?" Silas's voice dropped, the rasp becoming a growl. "I'm a monster, Amelia. Children cry when they see me. Women cross the street. I don't go to town because I'm tired of being the spectacle." He pulled his arm away from her, stepping back toward the water. "You're lucky you can't see it. If you could, you'd run into the woods and take your chances with the wolves." Amelia stood still, listening to the rushing water and the ragged breathing of the man who thought he was unlovable. "Come here," she said. "No, Silas, come here." Her voice wasn't commanding. It was an invitation. Reluctantly, drawn by a force he couldn't name, Silas stepped back to her. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I may not be able to see," Amelia whispered, raising her hand, "but I am not blind to you. I know you walk heavy on your left side because of an old injury. I know you smoke those terrible cigars when you're sad. I know you read to me until your throat hurts because you know it makes me happy." She reached out into the empty air. "Let me see you, Silas. Please." Silas froze. He knew what she wanted. He wanted to run, to let her touch the ruin of his face. The melted skin, the jagged ridges, the missing eyebrow felt more terrifying than the fire itself. It was the ultimate exposure, but he couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the look on. Her face open, waiting, unafraid. Slowly, agonizingly, he leaned down. Amelia's cool fingertips found his jawline first. She traced the bone, rough with stubble. Then she moved up. Her fingers brushed the healthy skin of his right cheek, then crossed the bridge of his nose to the other side. Silas stopped breathing. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for her to recoil. waiting for the gasp of disgust. Her fingers found the start of the scar. The skin was tight, waxy, and uneven. She traced the angry ridge that ran from his temple down to his cheekbone. She felt where the skin pulled at the corner of his eye. She mapped the devastation that the fire had left behind. She didn't pull. Away. Her touch remained light, curious, tender. She traced the scars as if she were reading Braille, decoding the history of his pain. "It must have hurt so much," she whispered, her thumb brushing the worst of it near his ear. "It did, Silas," croaked, his voice barely audible. "But it's healed now," she said. She moved her hand, so her palm cupped his scarred cheek, holding him there. "It's just skin, Silas. It's just a map of what you survived." She smiled, a small, private thing. "You have a strong face, and your eyes. I can feel you staring at." Are they blue? Brown?" Silas choked out. Like dirt. Like the earth," she corrected. "Like something that grows things." She lowered her hand, but the warmth of her touch lingered on his skin like a brand. Silas opened his eyes. She wasn't looking at him with horror. She was smiling at him. For the first time in 5 years, Silas Blackwood didn't feel like a beast. He felt like a man who had been lost in the dark and had just found a lantern. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering, then gently took her hand and tucked it back into the crook of his arm. "It's getting cold," he said, his voice thick with emotion he tried to hide. "We should get back. I think there's another chapter of Treasure Island left." "I think there is," Amelia agreed, squeezing his arm. They walked back to the house. In silence, but it was no longer the silence of two strangers sharing a roof. It was the companionable silence of two people who had just shared a secret. But as they reached the porch, Silas stopped. He looked toward the tree line at the edge of his property. The wind had shifted, and for a second he thought he smelled something that didn't belong in the high summer air. "What is it?" Amelia asked, sensing his tension. "Nothing," Silas lied, though his hand drifted instinctively to the knife on his belt. "Just a coyote. Let's go inside." But as he closed the heavy oak door and locked it, Silas couldn't shake the feeling that the peaceful interlude was over. The wind smelled like kerosene. The unease Silas felt at the tree line didn't dissipate with the setting sun. It lingered, a low-level hum of anxiety that made his scars itch. He paced the main room of the cabin, checking the window shutters, rechecking the lock on the heavy oak door. Amelia sat in her usual chair by the fire, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. She didn't need light to knit. Her fingers knew the wool better than her eyes ever had. "You're pacing," she said, not looking up. "You're wearing a groove in the floorboards." "Just checking the house," Silas muttered, peering through a crack. In the shutter, the night was pitch black, moonless. "Wind's picking up." "It's not the wind," Amelia said softly. She stopped knitting. "You smelled it too, didn't you?" "Earlier." Silas turned to her. "Smelled what?" "Kerosene," she whispered. "Faint, but it was there, mixed with ... horse sweat. Not your horse. A horse that's been ridden hard." Silas stared at her. Her blindness had sharpened her other senses to a razor's edge. If Amelia said she smelled kerosene and a stranger's horse, then someone had been watching them. "Stay here," Silas ordered, his voice dropping to a low growl. He moved to the mantel and took down his rifle. It was a heavy lever-action Winchester, a relic from his days before the fire, but he kept it oiled and loaded. "Silas?" Amelia's voice trembled slightly. "Who would come here? Everyone is afraid of you." "Not everyone," Silas said grimly. "Fear works on honest men. It doesn't work on wolves." He slipped out the back door, moving into the darkness with surprising stealth for a big man. The night air was cool, but the scent was stronger now. kerosene, and something else cheap tobacco. He circled the barn, his boots silent on the packed earth. He checked the horses. They were restless, shifting in their stalls. Someone had been near. Silas moved toward the perimeter fence. He crouched low, using the shadows as cover. He scanned the tree line. Nothing. Just the wind sighing through the pines. But then, a flicker. Not a firefly. A match. 50 yards away, deep in the brush, a tiny flame flared and then vanished, followed by the glowing cherry of a cigarette. Silas didn't shout. He didn't fire a warning shot. He raised the rifle, sighting in on the darkness, just above where the light had been. "You're trespassing," his voice boomed out, magnified by the silence of the mountains. "And I don't fire warning shots." There was a scramble in the brush, a curse, and then the sound of a horse, breaking into a gallop, crashing away through the undergrowth. Silas didn't chase. He couldn't leave Amelia alone. He lowered the rifle, his heart hammering against his ribs. It wasn't just a drifter. Drifters didn't lurk with kerosene. This was targeted. He walked back to the house, his mind racing. Who? Why now? He had lived in peace for 5 years, a ghost in his own kingdom. When he stepped back inside, Amelia was standing by the fireplace, her face pale. She held the poker in one hand, gripping it like a sword. "They're gone," Silas said, locking the door and sliding the heavy iron bolt home. "One man, maybe two. They ran. Who was it? I don't know. But they were watching the house." Silas walked over and gently took the poker from her shaking hand. "You need to sleep. I'll take the first watch." "I can't sleep," Amelia said. "Not when I smell that ... chemical." "Amelia," Silas said, putting his hands on her shoulders, "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise. The last time fire took something from me, I was a boy. I'm not a boy anymore." She nodded, leaning into his touch. "I believe you." The next morning, Silas found the tracks. They were distinct: a horse with a cracked shoe on a left hind hoof. And near where the man had stood, he found a cigarette butt. Not a hand-rolled one, but a factory-made one. Expensive. He rode out early, leaving Amelia with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. He followed the tracks down the mountain path, toward the town of Blackwood, the town named after his family, the town that had rejected him. The tracks led straight to the Golden Steer Saloon. Silas pulled his hat low over his scarred face and pushed through the swinging doors. The mid-morning crowd was sparse. A few drunks, a tired barmaid, and sitting at a corner table, nursing a whiskey, was a man Silas recognized. Not by name, but by type. He wore a dusty suit that had once been fine, and he had the shifty, desperate eyes of a gambler on a losing street. It was Henry, Amelia's father, and sitting across from him, looking bored and dangerous, was a man. Silas knew all too well Elias Thorne. Silas froze. Elias wasn't just anyone. He was the former foreman of the Blackwood ranch. The man Silas's father had fired for theft 2 weeks before the fire that killed him. The man everyone suspected, but no one could prove had set the blaze. Elias looked older, grayer, but the cruelty in his eyes was unchanged. He was talking low to Henry, tapping a finger on the table. Silas stepped forward, his spur dragging on the floorboards. The sound made heads turn. Elias looked up. His eyes widened, then narrowed into a sneer. "Well, well," Elias drawled. "If it isn't the crispy little air. Thought you never came down from your mountain, boy." "I come down when I smell rats," Silas rumbled, stopping at their table. He ignored Henry, who was cowering in his chair, looking at Silas with terrified recognition. "What are you doing with him, Elias?" Silas asked, nodding at Henry. "Just catching up with an old friend." Elias smiled, revealing yellow teeth. Henry here was telling me about his daughter, the one you bought. Seems he's having second thoughts. Wants her back. I didn't say that, Henry stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I just said ... I missed her. Shut up, Henry, Elias snapped. He looked back at Silas. See, Silas, word is you've got a nice little setup up there. Sheep, timber, and now a woman. Seems unfair for a monster to have all that, while honest men starve. You're not an honest man, Elias. You're a thief and an arsonist, Silas said calmly. I found your tracks on my land. Stay away. Elias stood up. He was big, almost as big as Silas, but soft with age and drink. Or what? You gonna burn me like you burned yourself? I'm gonna finish what the law couldn't, Silas promised. If I see you near my property again, I won't ask you to leave. I'll bury you there. He turned to look at Henry. The older man was trembling. And you, Silas said, his voice dripping with disgust. You sold her. You don't get to miss her. If you come near her, I'll break every bone in your hand that took my gold. Silas turned and walked out. He felt Elias's eyes on his back, burning hotter than any fire. He knew this wasn't over. Elias wasn't just back for money. He was back to finish the job he started 10 years ago. He wanted the Blackwood land, and as long as Silas was alive, he couldn't have it. Silas mounted his horse and rode hard for the mountain. He had to get back to Amelia. The wind was picking up again, blowing from the south. Hot, dry-fire weather. Silas rode Buster into the ground, the horse's coat lathered with white foam as they galloped up the final switchback to the ranch. The sun was setting, casting long blood-red shadows across the valley. To anyone else, it was a beautiful sunset. To Silas, it looked like the world was already burning. He skidded to a halt in front of the porch, leaping off before the horse had fully stopped. "Amelia!" he roared, bursting through the door. She was standing by the window, her knuckles white. As she gripped the sill, she turned toward him, her face a mask of terror. "You're back," she breathed. "I heard the hooves. You are riding too fast." "We have to move," Silas said, grabbing her arm. "Pack a bag. Water, food, ammunition." "Silas, what is it? What happened?" "In town? Elias Thorne." Silas spat the name like a curse. "He's back, and he's not alone. He's got your father with him, and likely a few hired guns." Amelia froze. "My father?" "They're coming to finish what started 10 years ago," Silas said, moving frantically around the room, shuttering the windows and barring them with heavy iron beams he had installed after the first fire. "They want the land. They want me dead. And they don't care who gets caught in the crossfire." He stopped and looked at her. "I should have sent you away. I should have put you on a train the day I bought you." "And go where?" Amelia asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "To a father who sells me? To a world that pities me? No, Silas. I am staying." Silas looked at her, his heart twisting. He went to the gun cabinet and pulled out a heavy revolver. He pressed it into her hand. "Do you know how to use this?" Amelia felt the weight of the cold steel. "No. Point and pull," Silas said grimly. "It's heavy. Use 2 hands. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me ... you pull the trigger. Until it clicks." Night fell like a shroud. The wind howled around the eaves of the house, masking the sounds of the forest. Inside, Silas and Amelia sat in the dark. Lighting a lamp would only make them targets. Silas sat by the front window, rifle across his knees, watching the tree line through a crack in the shutter. Amelia sat on the floor near the kitchen, away from the windows. "Silas," she whispered, "the wind. It's changed direction." Silas tensed. "It's blowing from the south now." "No," she said, tilting her head. "I mean, the smell. It's not just pine anymore." She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring. "Oil," she whispered. "And sulfur." Crack. The sound wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of glass breaking in the barn, 50 yards away. A second later, a whoosh of igniting fuel roared through the night. The barn! Silas yelled, jumping up. Through the crack in the shutter, he saw it. An orange glow erupted from the barn doors, climbing the walls with terrifying speed. The dry timber, seasoned by years of high-altitude sun, caught like kindling. Inside, the horses began to scream. It was a sound that tore through Silas's soul high-pitched, terrified shrieks of animals trapped in an inferno. It was the same sound he had heard the night his parents died. The night his face melted. He froze. The flashback hit him like a physical blow. The heat, the smoke, the inability to move. "Silas!" Amelia's voice cut through the paralysis. She had crawled to him and was gripping his leg. "The horses. You have to let them out." "It's a trap," Silas choked out, shaking. "They want me to run out there. They're waiting in the dark." "If you don't go, they die," Amelia cried. "You are not a monster, Silas. Monsters let things burn. Men save them." Her words slapped him out of his trance. She was right. He couldn't. Let the animals burn. Not again. "Bar the door behind me," Silas commanded, his voice returning to its granite hardness. "Do not open it for anyone but me. Listen for my knock 3 rapid taps. Anything else you shoot." "Go," she said. Silas threw open the door and sprinted into the night. The heat hit him instantly. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames licking the night sky. He ran in a zigzag pattern, expecting a bullet at any second. Bang! A shot rang out from the tree line. Dirt kicked up near his boot. Silas didn't stop. He raised his Winchester and fired 3 shots blindly into the woods to suppress the shooter, then dove toward the corral gate. He reached the heavy wooden latch and threw it open. Get out!" He slapped the rump of the lead mare as she galloped out, eyes rolling in terror, mane singed. The other horses followed, stampeding into the darkness away from the fire. Silas crouched behind the water trough, breathing hard. The heat was searing his scars, making the old wounds throb in agony. He scanned the woods. He saw muzzle flashes. 2 shooters. Maybe 3. He was pinned down. Inside the house, Amelia sat in the pitch blackness, clutching the heavy revolver. With both hands, her world was a symphony of terrifying sounds. The roar of the fire outside sounded like a living beast eating the sky. The distant pop-pop-pop of gunfire. The thud of her own heart. But then she heard something else. It wasn't the fire. It wasn't the guns. It was a scraping sound. Close. Scritch. A sea-rich. It was coming from the back of the house. The kitchen window. Silas had barred the shutters, but the wood on that window was old. She heard the groan of metal prying against wood. A crowbar. Someone wasn't shooting at Silas. Someone was breaking in while he was distracted. Amelia stood up, her legs trembling. She navigated the room by memory, moving silently in her stocking feet. She pressed her back against the wall next. To the kitchen doorway. The scraping stopped. Then a loud crack as the shutter gave way. Glass shattered inward. Amelia held her breath. "He's at the barn," a voice whispered. It wasn't Silas. It was higher, reedy. A voice she recognized from the saloon. Her father. "Hurry up, Henry," a second voice hissed Elias. "Get inside and pour the oil. We burn the house with the bitch inside. That'll break him." I don't want to hurt her," Henry whimpered. "You said we'd just scare him. Get in there." Elias shoved him. Amelia heard the clumsy scramble of a body climbing through the broken window. Boots hit the floorboards. The smell of unwashed clothes and fear filled the kitchen. Her father was inside, and he was holding a can of kerosene. Amelia raised the heavy revolver. She couldn't see them, but she could hear Henry's wheezing breath. She could smell the oil sloshing in the can. She pointed the gun into the darkness, aiming at the sound of the breathing. "Hello, Father," she said, softly. The kitchen was pitch black, a void filled only with the smell of spilled kerosene and the ragged, terrified breathing of Henry. "Amelia?" Henry whispered, his voice trembling. "Put the gun down, girl. It's me, your papa. Now know who you are," Amelia said, her voice eerily calm in the darkness. She didn't lower the weapon. The heavy Colt Dragoon revolver wavered slightly in her small hands, but her aim remained fixed on the sound of his voice. "I stopped having a father the moment you sold me for a bag of coins. I came to save you." Henry lied, the desperation leaking from every word. "That man, he's a monster. I came to take you home." "You came with oil," Amelia countered, her ears picking up the distinct glug-glug sound as the canister in Henry's hand shook. "You came to burn him out, and if I was inside, well, that would just be a tragic accident, wouldn't it? One less mouth to feed. Henry, what are you doing?" Elias's voice hissed from the window, cruel and impatient. "Light it, or I'll come in there and light you both." "I can't," Henry whimpered. "She's got a gun. She's blind, you idiot." Elias snarled. Amelia heard the crunch of glass under a boot. Elias was climbing in. She shifted her aim. She didn't need to see them. The darkness was her ally, not theirs. She heard the heavy thud of Elias's boots hitting the floorboards. She heard the rasp of a match against a rough surface. Scritch, that sound, the birth of fire, was the loudest thing in the world. No. Amelia screamed. She pulled the trigger. Boom. The revolver roared like a cannon in the confined space. The recoil nearly broke her wrists, throwing her backward against the wall. The muzzle flash illuminated the room for a split second, a strobe light of horror revealing Elias standing by the stove, a lit match in his hand, and Henry cowering in the corner. The bullet missed Elias's heart, but it shattered the cast iron. Skillet hanging just inches from his head. The shrapnel and the concussive force made him flinch violently. He dropped the match. It fell in slow motion, a tiny spark of doom. It landed in a puddle of kerosene that had sloshed from Henry's can. Whoosh.a. Wall of blue and orange flame erupted across the floor, separating Amelia from the two men. "You stupid bitch!" Elias screamed, backing away from the heat. "Shoots blindly. Kill her, Henry." Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Silas had heard the boom of his own revolver inside the house. To Silas, that sound was worse than the bullet, grazing his shoulder. It meant the war was inside. He abandoned cover. He stood up from behind the water trough, a towering silhouette against the burning barn. The hired guns in the woods fired at him, bullets whizzing past, one clipping his duster coat. He didn't care. He ran. He ran with the fury of a man who had already lost everything once to fire and refused to lose it again. He hit the back porch. Steps at a sprint, lowering his shoulder. Crash. Silas smashed through the back door, splintering the lock. He burst into the kitchen just as the fire was beginning to climb the curtains. The scene was a nightmare. A wall of fire divided the room. On one side, Amelia was coughing, trying to crawl away from the heat, the gun still clutched in her hand. On the other side, Elias was aiming a pistol at her through the flames. "Silas!" Amelia screamed, hearing his heavy boots. "Left! He's on your left!" Silas didn't think. He reacted. He saw Elias raising the gun. Silas lunged through the wall of fire. He felt the flames lick his duster, felt the heat sear his scars, but he didn't stop. He tackled Elias with the force of a freight train. They crashed into the table, shattering it. Elias's gun went off, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. Silas was on top of him, a demon born of smoke and ash. He punched Elias once, twice, the sound of bone cracking sickeningly loud. "You brought fire to my house?" Silas roared, his hands finding Elias's throat. To her? Henry, seeing the monster unleashed, dropped the kerosene can and scrambled for the window. "Papa, wait!" Amelia cried out, disoriented by the smoke. Henry didn't look back. He dove out the window, disappearing into the night, leaving his daughter to burn. Silas looked down at Elias, who was choking, his face purple. The fire was spreading fast now. The dry timber of the ceiling was catching. Silas could kill him. It would be easy. It would be justice. But then he heard Amelia coughing a wet, desperate sound. The choice was instant. Revenge or Amelia? Silas released Elias's throat, shoving the gasping man away. "Get out," he growled. "If I see you again, I won't stop." Elias didn't argue. He scrambled away on hands and knees, fleeing the inferno. Silas turned. He couldn't see Amelia through the thick black smoke. "Amelia!" Here, a small voice rasped from the floor. I can't breathe." Silas found her. He scooped her up into his arms, shielding her face with his coat. She felt so small, so fragile against the heat. "I've got you," he choked out, the smoke searing his own damaged lungs. "Hold your breath." He kicked the back door wider and carried her out into the cool night air, away from the burning kitchen, away from the memories, and into the tall grass of the yard. Behind them, the kitchen window blew out, glass shattering as the heat grew. Silas laid her down in the grass, checking her frantically. "Amelia? Are you hurt? Did the fire touch you?" Amelia was gasping, her face streaked with soot, her eyes streaming tears from the smoke. She reached up, her hands trembling, and found his face. She traced the familiar ridges of his scars. "You came back," she whispered. "I will always come back," Silas vowed, his voice breaking. But as he looked up, he saw the fire spreading to the main roof. The hired guns had fled, and Elias was gone. But the enemy that remained, the fire was winning. His house, his sanctuary. It was dying. "Let it burn," Silas whispered, looking at the flames reflecting in Amelia's sightless eyes. "As long as you're here, let it all burn." The sun rose over the Blackwood ranch, but it brought no warmth. It only brought light to the devastation. The great timber house, the fortress Silas had built to hide himself from the world, was gone. In its place stood a jagged skeleton of charred beams and a defiant stone chimney, rising like a tombstone from a grave of gray ash. Smoke still curled lazily from the ruins, carrying the sickening scent of wet charcoal and lost memories. Silas sat on a flat rock near the edge of the yard, his duster coat scorched and torn, his face streaked with soot and dried blood. He stared at the wreckage with the hollow eyes of a man who has been hollowed out. He had lost his parents to fire. Now he had lost his home. The curse, it seemed, was absolute. "It's all gone," he murmured, his voice cracking. Beside him, wrapped in a horse blanket he had salvaged from the corral, Amelia stirred. She sat up, wincing as her bruised body protested. She turned her head, her unseeing eyes scanning the darkness that was her world. "Silas," she whispered. "I'm here," he said, though he felt like a ghost. "Or what's left of me. The house?" "Ashes," Silas said bitterly. "Just a pile of black dirt, my books, the furniture. The roof over your head. It's all gone, Amelia. I have nothing left." He looked at her hands small, blistered from the heat, shaking slightly. Guilt crashed over him like a landslide. "I should have never brought you here," he rasped, burying his face in his hands. "I am cursed. Fire follows me. And now it's burned you too." He waited for her to agree. He waited for her to scream, to cry, to demand to be taken back to town. Back to anywhere that wasn't this HELLSCAPE. Instead, he felt a hand on his knee. "Silas," Amelia said softly, "look at me." He lifted his head. She had dropped the blanket. She shivered in the morning chill, her dress ruined, her hair a tangled mess of soot. But she was sitting up. She was breathing. "Describe it to me," she commanded. "Describe what? The ruin?" "The morning," she said. "Tell me what you see." Silas blinked, confused. He looked around. He looked past the smoking debris. "The sun is coming up over the ridge," he said slowly. "It's pink. The sky is clear. The smoke is drifting south. And the horses?" Silas looked toward the meadow. "They came back. They're grazing near the creek, spooked but safe." "And the land?" Amelia pressed. "Is the ground still there?" "Are the mountains still standing?" "Yes," Silas said, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. "The land is still here." "Then you haven't lost everything," Amelia said firmly. She reached out, her hand finding his soot-stained cheek. "You lost a building, Silas. A building where you hid yourself. A building where you locked yourself away in the dark." She leaned closer, her voice fierce. "The walls are down. The roof is gone. Don't you see? You're not hiding anymore." Silas stared at her. The words struck him with the force of a revelation. For 5 years, the house had been his sanctuary, but it had also been his coffin. He had haunted it, afraid to step into the light, now forced. Into the open air, sitting in the dirt with nothing but the clothes on his back and the woman beside him. He felt a strange, terrifying lightness. "But I have nothing to offer you," he whispered. "No roof, no kitchen, just a scarred face and a patch of scorched earth." Amelia smiled. It was a tired smile, but it reached her eyes. "You have strong hands," she said, taking his large, rough hand in hers. "You have a voice that reads me stories, and you have a heart that ran into a fire to save me." She squeezed his hand. "I don't need a roof, Silas. I need you. We can build a roof. We can't build a soul. And yours is the finest I've ever known." Silas looked at their joined hands as scarred and massive, hers small and pale. The contrast was stark, but the fit was perfect. He stood up, pulling her gently with him. He dusted off her dress, his movements tender. "You're right," he said, his voice changing. The rasp of defeat was gone, replaced by the deep rumble of determination. "We can build." He looked at the stone chimney, the heart of the house that had survived the inferno. "The foundation is still good," he noted. "The stone held." "Then we start there," Amelia said. Silas looked at her, really looked at her. "I'm going to build you a kitchen first," he promised, "with a window that faces the sun, so you can feel the warmth while you bake. And a porch," Amelia added, "so we can listen to the rain." "And a lock," Silas added grimly, his eyes hardening as he looked toward the woods where Elias had fled. "Because before we build, I have one piece of business to finish." Amelia stiffened. She knew that tone. It was the tone of the wolf protecting its mate. Silas ... "He will come back, Amelia. Men like Elias and your father ... they are like rot. If you don't cut it out, it spreads." He walked over to where he had dropped his Winchester in the grass the night before. The stock was scorched, but the action was smooth. He checked the chamber. "Loaded?" "I'm going to town," Silas said. I'm going to the sheriff. And if the sheriff won't act, well, the law is different up here on the mountain. I'm coming with you, Amelia said, grabbing her cane from the grass. No, it's too dangerous. You just said the walls are down, Silas, she said stubbornly, tilting her chin up. I am not staying behind in the ashes. Where you go, I go. Besides, she paused, her expression hardening in a way that reminded him of the moment she had pulled the trigger the night before. I heard which way my father ran. He drags his left foot when he's tired. I can hear him miles before you can see him. Silas looked at her, this blind, fierce, incredible woman who had risen from the ashes of her own life to save his. A fierce pride swelled in his chest, hot enough to burn away the last of his shame. He walked over and lifted her onto the back of the lead mare, who had wandered close to them. He swung up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist to hold the reins. All right, Mrs. Blackwood, he whispered into her hair, using the title for the first time. Let's go clean house. The town of Blackwood was waking up to a lazy Tuesday morning when the nightmare rode down Main Street. Silas Blackwood, covered in soot and dried blood, sat atop his scorched mare. Behind him, clinging to his waist, was the blind girl, Amelia. They looked like spirits risen from the underworld, battered, terrifying, and unstoppable. Silence rippled through the town as they passed. Shopkeepers stopped sweeping. The piano in the Golden Steer saloon fell silent. Silas didn't look left or right. He rode straight to the sheriff's office, dismounted, and lifted Amelia down. He placed her hand on his arm. Ready? He asked. Ready, she answered, her voice steel. Silas kicked the door open. Sheriff Miller looked up from his desk, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Sitting opposite him, nursing a shattered arm in a sling and looking nervous, was Elias Thorne. Cowering in the corner cell unlocked, presumably for protection, was Henry. Sheriff, Silas rumbled, his voice filling the small room. You have my arsonist. Elias jumped up, his face pale but his eyes vicious. He's the one. Look at him, Miller. He came to my camp last night, crazy as a loon, tried to kill me and the old man. Burned his own barn just to blame me. Sheriff Miller looked at Silas, the scars, the soot, the fearsome reputation. Then he looked at Elias, a respectable foreman. Silas, the sheriff said cautiously, hand drifting to his gun. Elias says you attacked him. He lies, Silas said calmly. You got a witness? Elias sneered. A blind girl don't count. Freak. She didn't see nothing. Silas stepped forward, the floorboards groaning. She sees more than you ever will. Amelia stepped out from behind Silas. She tapped her cane once. The sound cracked like a gavel. I didn't. See you light the match, Mr. Thorne, Amelia said, her voice clear and melodic. But I heard you strike it against the cast-iron stove in my kitchen. I heard you tell my father to pour the kerosene. And I heard you scream when Silas broke your arm. She turned her head unerringly toward the corner cell. And you, father, I heard you breathing. The wheezing breath you get when you're scared. You smelled of cheap whiskey and fear when you sold me. And you smelled of kerosene and betrayal when you climbed through my window. The room was deathly quiet. It's her word against mine. Elias shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. She's his whore. She'll say whatever he wants. I have one more piece of evidence, Silas said. He reached into his duster pocket and pulled out a charred, twisted object. He tossed it onto the sheriff's desk. It was a silver belt buckle. Warped by heat, but the initials were still visible. E.T. Found it in the ashes of my kitchen, Silas lied smoothly. In truth, he had ripped it off Elias during the fight, but the theater was necessary. Must have fallen off when I threw you out of the fire. Elias's hand instinctively went to his waist, where his belt was missing. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He looked at the buckle, then at Elias's waist. "Elias," Sheriff Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "Sit down." "No." Elias panicked. He wasn't going to prison. He wasn't going to hang. With his good hand, Elias drew the revolver hidden. In his coat, bang, the shot was deafening in the small space. Amelia didn't flinch. She felt Silas move a blur of motion faster than thought. Elias screamed, dropping his gun. He clutched his hand, blood welling between his fingers. Silas stood, with his smoking Colt Dragoon leveled, smoke curling from the barrel. He hadn't killed him. He had shot the weapon right out of his hand. "I am not a murderer," Silas growled, stepping over the writhing man. "That is the difference between you and me, Elias. I build, you burn." The sheriff was on his feet instantly. Cuffs out. "Elias Thorne, you're under arrest for arson and attempted murder." Silas holstered his gun and turned to the corner cell. Henry was weeping, clutching the bars. "Amelia," Henry sobbed. "Please, I'm sorry. He made me do it. Tell them. Tell them I'm your papa." Amelia walked forward until her cane hit the bars. She stood there, listening to the man who had given her life and then sold it away. "My father died in a saloon 3 months ago," Amelia said softly. "You are just a stranger who owes a debt. And Silas paid it." She turned her back on him. "Let's go home, Silas." 1 year later, the wind on the mountain was gentle, carrying the scent of wildflowers in fresh mortar. Where the blackened ruin had once stood, a new house rose. It was built of gray river stone, fireproof and sturdy. It had a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides, and the windows were large, catching every minute of the high-altitude sun. Silas stood on the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He had just finished hanging the swing. He looked different. The scars were still there. They would always be there, but the tension that used to coil his muscles was gone. He wore a clean shirt, and his hair was trimmed. "Silas?" He turned. Amelia stepped out the door, holding a tray of lemonade. She moved through the house with absolute confidence, her hand trailing lightly along the stone walls she had helped design. "Right here," Silas said, taking the tray from her. "Is it finished?" She asked, finding the swing and sitting down. "It is." Silas sat beside her. The swing creaked gently, a happy sound. Stone walls, slate roof. "It won't burn, Amelia. I promise." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never worried about the house, Silas. A house is just walls." She reached up, her hand finding his face. Her fingers traced the scar on his cheek, and moved to his lips, which curved into a smile under her touch. "The townspeople say you're a hero now," Amelia teased. "They say you tamed the mountain." "They talk too much," Silas grumbled, though there was no heat in it. "I didn't tame anything. I just stopped running." He looked out at the valley. The sheep were grazing. The fences were mended. The world was at peace. "Amelia," he said suddenly, sometimes I look in the mirror, and I see the monster." Amelia shifted, turning her face toward him. Her cloudy eyes caught the sunlight, looking like trapped pieces of the sky. "Then stop looking in the mirror," she whispered. "Look at me." "I am looking at you. And what do you see?" Silas swallowed past the lump in his throat. "I see the woman who saved me. I see the light." "And I see you, Silas Blackwood," she said, fiercely. "I don't need eyes to see that you are the most beautiful man in the world." Silas closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. The darkness was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of intimacy, of shared breath and beating. "Hearts, I love you," he whispered into the silence of the mountain. "I know," Amelia smiled. "I can see it."